Hi there, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I'm hopeful that everybody can hear me okay. Is that a thumbs up? Thank you. Okay. All right, thanks. Really appreciate everybody making time. I've been recently making some presentations around Lake Bluff, and I thought it might be really helpful to have one here for members of the public, and this will be posted on Stormwater Management site. So we'll be sure to give everybody who's registered here tonight the information on how to access that. So thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sandy Hart. I have lived in Lake Bluff for 23 years now. I previously served on the Park District Board and am currently the chair of the Lake County Board. I'm joined by Kurt Wolford. He is the executive director of Lake County Stormwater Management Commission. And I'll refer to Stormwater Management Commission going forward probably as SMC. Also joining us is Ashley Strelchuk. She's our water resources professional with SMC. So before I begin, I really want to thank the Park District Board for allowing me to have presented on October 18th. They have had a very busy schedule and I appreciate them making time for me. I also really want to say thank you to all of our local elected officials here in Lake Bluff and elsewhere, but certainly here in Lake Bluff, because I'm going to guess most everybody on here is from Lake Bluff. They all volunteer, they donate their time to serve the rest of us. And I just want to say thank you to them for doing that. So I appreciate everybody being here and to sign up to learn more about this regional flooding project, formerly called the Skokie River Floodplain Enhancement Project. And really what the crux of it is really how by partnering with the agencies involved in this, the Lake Bluff Park District and therefore the Lake Bluff residents, and I am a Lake Bluff resident, could see some tremendous benefits environmentally, economically, and recreationally. Sorry, I don't know why my screen is not. There we go. So if you've seen this presentation before, I've added in a couple things. And again, I also want to say thank you to the folks who have sent in some really good questions. We were able to dig in deeper and provide more detail on things, and in some cases provide some updates. And so I'll be sure to make note of those places where there's been an update there. So first, part one, this is the project. It is the Skokie River watershed, the flooding impacts that occur, and what are the options to mitigate that flood damage. And then part two, really the partnership, right? What are the potential benefits for the Lake Bluff residents? What are wetland credits? What are the different examples of the land use? And really, why are we talking about that now? So it's really two different sections. So, you know, we know that it's really frustrating when we have flooding that closes our golf course. And as we know, that happens on a fairly regular basis. So here's a couple. This is from way back in 2013. This one before here was in 2014. So it's a problem, right? And it's frustrating enough when it happens on our golf course. But you know, it's even more frustrating when it happens in your home. And this is the Strawberry Condominium parking lot. It's just north of us on just on the west side of US 41, just south of 137. So there's a bunch of condos in there, and we'll sort of delve into that a little bit deeper. But a lot of people were flooded out of their homes. You know, their cars were totaled, and they lost a lot of possessions during this time. So the Strawberry condo common areas were also flooded. I hope you can see this brown water that has really filled up in here. So it was really a significant area, a real concern. So, and this has happened twice in the last 7 years. So these are, you know, in the past, these were considered to be 100-year flood events. But as I said, in the last 7 years, we've had it twice. We had over 50 homes damaged in the North Chicago and Naval Station Great Lakes. This is the road, I'm sure you recognize it, right? This is 137 and 41 looking south. And hopefully you can see that's, I think, and Kurt, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that's the top of a hydrant there. And I don't know if you can really tell because of the reflection, but it's quite far up on this sign. So it's really has significant impacts, right? There's negative impacts for the businesses that are located along this road. And it has regional impacts too, right? So when this road closes, it's a real problem. There's public safety concerns, and then schools have to close too. So stormwater management began really working on this project. And just to give you a little background on who stormwater management is, stormwater management in Lake County is the agency that's really tasked with reducing flood damage across Lake County, and I would say and beyond, right? Because we always say water doesn't know borders, you know, governmental borders or whatever. So that's what they work on. They work with cities, they work with villages, they even work with homeowners associations to really, again, holistically manage stormwater. And that's because SMC really requires that any project that they work on, any stormwater improvement, and you can see there's a lot of projects that they have done. Hopefully everybody sees my cursor moving. They've done a lot of projects, and their commitment is to make sure that they're not just pushing problems downstream. So all of these light blue and red dots, I hope everybody can see that okay, are all the areas where they have worked across the county. As you can see, there's a lot of those little dots. Communities across Lake County are part of Stormwater Management Commission. They're called certified communities, and we can fill you in about that a little more as we go forward. So this area here, I've kind of outlined it. This is essentially the area that we're going to be talking about the most. This is where those flooding issues have been occurring. So the project goal, right, based upon the flooding that we saw, is to eliminate the flooding along US 41. There's a lot happening in this map. So this map is, it's really a computer simulation of what happens during a major storm event. So partners have been working on this project since 2015. And one of the first things that they were doing was they had to determine how the water flowed. Sorry, excuse me for a second. The first thing they had to do was to show how the water flowed by conducting, it's called a hydrology and hydraulics study. And this photo shows a simulation of really what happens during one of those rain events. So right here, this is US 41. This is the railroad tracks here, this Park District property down here. I signified this with just a little circle down here because IDOT is going to be working on that in the coming months, or maybe over the next 18 months. And I also wanted to point this out. This is a wetland bank that IDOT owns. It's about 156 acres. So when there's a major storm event like what we've been seeing, the water overtops the berm. Let me just make sure I'm seeing where I am. The water overtops the berm here on the west side of these condos, and you saw where they were flooding, right? Floods the home, floods the little pond there, floods this pond. It travels down this street, it's called Bittersweet, and then comes onto the Skokie, right? There's also some water that goes in here, but this is, these are wetlands back here. So it goes into the Skokie, and if you guys can see, and I hope you can, this star right here signifies where the water goes underneath the railroad tracks and enters into the Skokie. And from there, so all of this water, right, goes down along the Skokie and then ends up in the Park District as it continues its way down the Skokie. So along its way, it floods 41. It also floods the military housing that's on the just north of us, just west of Green Bay Road. So it floods that military housing, and then of course it floods the golf course. So I just really want to be clear that this has been happening for decades, right? This is the path of that water. So there's no new water being discussed. This is the path of the water on how it's been traveling, you know, for decades. So I do want to be clear, there's been some questions like, well, wait, maybe if the water went somewhere else, then the golf course wouldn't flood anymore. The golf course is on a floodplain. So the golf course will, I mean, and that's the case for many golf courses. They are oftentimes located in a floodplain. So, the golf course would still have flooding. Even if we could divert something elsewhere, it would still have flooding because it's in the floodplain. So the engineering study that they worked together, all the partners worked together, found that it was necessary to increase the height of this berm, okay, along this wetland bank, and that'll protect some of the homeowners there. And they also said it was necessary to enlarge some storm sewers and some culverts so the water can move faster. And it also said you got to increase a pipe right under here. If you want this 41 to clear and not have the water sit on 41, you got to put a bigger pipe under here so it will drain out more quickly. So that's really significant because when a larger pipe is placed under the railroad tracks, that's going to alleviate the flooding for the homeowners and the businesses and will keep the road open. That larger pipe is also going to affect the timing, right? How quickly the water can leave the area. So obviously garden hose, fire hose, right? There's a difference in that. So the larger the pipe, the more quickly the water can leave the area, and that will alleviate the flooding. However, what we don't want to have happen is any downstream negative impacts as a result of the water coming in faster, right? Leaving this area faster. So we want to make sure there's no downstream impacts. And so what they found that they needed was they needed to find 40 acre feet of additional capacity. The Skokie ditch, right, is this area, right? It's either called the Skokie River or the Skokie ditch. It's considered a flashy system, and Kurt can talk to that in a little bit. And what that means is that it floods quickly and then it recedes pretty quickly, right? So, and that wouldn't change. So it's not like needing to have 40 acre feet of water that's going to sit there for extended periods of time. The water will recede away just like it does today. So I just really want to be clear on this. The water, this is what happens in a 100-year flood, and it kind of travels through here, goes under here, and this has been happening for a really long time. So there's, again, and there's been a number of questions, and it is really confusing. I have learned a ton over the last several months as I've been really being engaged on this project. There's no additional water being diverted. It is the same water that ends up on our golf course today. And I really want to thank Commissioner Lane and Commissioner Beeler, or Vice President Beeler, excuse me, of the Park District, because they brought up a really good point. You know, stormwater has a lot of unwelcome things in it. So you can imagine for these homeowners, right, who are ending up with stormwater in their homes, you know, we really want to alleviate that from them, right? We also don't want it ending up really anywhere, right? So, so they brought up a really good point that this stormwater has a lot of kind of gross things in it. You know, we heard things like used needles, oil, garbage, cigarette butts, animal feces, fecal chloroform. And I just really want to be clear that any or all of these things could be in that stormwater that is currently flooding the golf course property today. So the water that comes on the golf course today and has been for decades, you know, on a yearly basis and sometimes more frequently, it sits on top of the grass, sometimes for days, right? And eventually it recedes and goes into the Skokie River, where it adds to the pollution of that river. So one of the things that we talked about at the Park District meeting on the 18th, and I think Vice President Beeler brought it up, was, hey, is there something that can be done to filter that water? And, you know, Kirk can speak to this more in depth, but yes, if the Park District chooses to partner with everybody on this project, yes, we can figure out a way to filter that water so that when it does come onto the golf course, that it is really cleaner. So just really want to say thank you to Commissioners Beeler and Lane for their leadership and interest in tackling this problem, regardless as to whether or not we move forward on this project. So, all right, there's that. And I think there should be a chat feature. Hopefully everybody has access to a chat feature. So if you have questions, please do put it in the chat. Because it is a complicated project and we want to answer as many questions as we can and give people as much time as they need. I've also been in the process of putting together a frequently asked questions document, and it's been great. The questions are coming in, which is terrific. So I am working on it and constantly updating it, and hopefully I'll have it out. Gosh, if I could have it out by Friday, I'll do my best. So that's just know that we're happy to take your questions. One of the questions that we did have since the last one was like, hey, when did this project start, right? So I asked Kurt to provide this. This project really started in really 2015, right? In spring of 2014, Strawberry Condos had significant flooding. And this is really all of the work that's been done. I apologize for some of the, here's experienced. But this is all of the work that's been done over time. And so really we're about here. And so if you can see where my cursor here is at the end. So we're really at the place where we're trying to determine where that, stormwater storage can go. And when we do, they can really start working on that project. So you can see the partners have been working together for quite a bit of time, and they've done a lot of work already. They've done some drainage improvements. They've done this drainage improvement here also just recently in 2020, the study that was done here in August, September 2020. And then Stormwater Management Commission had been working with the Park District on this project. I think the initial reach out was like in January 2021. So it's not new news, which is great, but certainly it's a lot of information, and we recognize that that everybody's really busy working on important things. So, so these are the options before us, right? We need to find 40 acre feet to hold that capacity so that we don't end up with that downstream flooding, right? So that when we increase the size of that pipe, it's not just going to be like a fire hose coming down there, right? And then flooding areas out downstream. So there were 3 areas that were identified. First one is this Navy property here. If you guys are familiar with Forestall Village, it's right, you could put like a detention basin right in there, and you can see they already have some detention basins. So this yellow, this blue signifies the detention basins that they have on that property. Another spot where they could put it is right about here, also on the Navy property. And then another option is on the Park District golf course. And to be clear, it can be really anything, right? On the Navy property, they don't have room to do a lot of things other than maybe a detention basin, but the Park District might have more room. So these are those 3 options that are available. And because this is part of this regional flooding issue, right? It's one of the top priorities for Lake County Stormwater Management Commission, and really for the region. Stormwater management will pay for the construction costs. So if the Navy were to say, yeah, you know what, we'll do it. We recognize this is important. People's homes are being flooded. US 41 is being flooded. We'll put a detention basin here, and Stormwater will pay for that, right? Because it's part of this project. Same thing here, same thing with the golf course. If the Park District said, yeah, you know what, we want to be a good neighbor and we've got some room up here or whatever, we can fit a detention basin in there, Stormwater would say, terrific, that's great, thank you very much, we'll pay for it. So those kind of stormwater storage areas or capacity, it can be a detention basin, and we've seen those all over the place, right? There's one by the Target There's one by the new school. There's these detention basins that we know come along with new construction. So we've seen detention basins, and they're very common. But other times you can put in wetlands, and they serve the same purpose. And if anybody wants to ask the question of Kurt, he'll tell you exactly why actually adding wetlands is a much better reason, because there's many benefits that you really get from wetlands. So aside from the environmental benefits, there's an economic benefit, and there's also a recreational benefit for the park district and therefore the residents of Lake Bluff. So just to recap this flooding project, Stormwater Management Commission's mission is to reduce flooding without any negative downstream impacts. This project is to alleviate that flooding on US 41 between 176 and 137. We need additional stormwater storage, and it's not like it's going to be filled with water all the time, right? We talked about how it's a flashy system, right? The rain comes in, the water comes in, it sits for a little bit, and then it flows away, right? So it's sort of a, I don't want to say temporary, but it's not going to be filled with water all the time. So stormwater storage is needed for this increased velocity, so we don't have that downstream flooding, not the volume. There's no change in the volume of the water other than increased rainfall, which we know we're getting. And that's to ensure no negative impact from the project. And there's 3 options available, right? 2 Navy properties and or the Lake Bluff Golf Course. And I'm saying and or the Lake Bluff Golf Course because conceivably, all 3 could be done, right? Or a combination, you know, one on the Navy property, something on the park district, but just remains to be seen. I hope I said really what's needed is a minimum of 40 acre feet. And so because we need a minimum, if we can get more than 40 acre feet, we'll pay for it, right? Because we want to make sure that, that we're not circling back to this project again. So we'll take 40 acre feet. That's the minimum we need. If we can get more, we'll pay for the construction of that. So that's sort of the recap of the project, okay? So now why would it make sense, right, for, for the park district to be part of this? So there's really a benefit for Lake Bluff residents to participate in this project. We'll talk a little bit about wetland credits, examples of land use, and why this matters now. So I've had a couple questions about, you know, what are wetlands? And it's a really good question because there's actually in Illinois, there's 13 different types of wetlands. And so there's a lot of information there. And I want to thank Kurt Wolford for finding this for me, because this would give you a better sense of when we're talking about wetlands for this project, these are the kind of things that we're talking about, right? You could have open water, right? So a pond or whatever. You could have this deep marshy area, and this gives you the water depths, right, down here. And it goes everything from this up to a forested wetland. So you can have a wetland that has trees, right? There's a forested wetland has oaks, oak trees and elm trees and hickory trees. So that was something that I learned. It usually has a variety of annual or perennial plants on the forest floor. You could have this sort of scrub and shrubs wetlands. So that's very common in the area, or it used to be common. Actually, there's very few areas of wetlands left. There's something called a wet meadow. The water is just, you know, like just below the surface really, or just, you know, like at 0 to 6 inches. And it's usually intermittent. The water doesn't always just sit there, right? And actually the next one is really this shallow marsh. And I just really want to speak to this area. That is, these 2 areas are just excellent for wildlife. And so this is something that attracts a lot of fish and birds. It's just a very rich ecosystem. And so what's also important, and what I've heard was, well, is this going to attract a lot of mosquitoes? This project could design it to however the park district and the residents want it to be. So if the park district and the residents wanted it to be a lot of open water, it could look like this. If they wanted it to be water that's sort of constantly moving, where it's very difficult for mosquito larvae to hatch, they can do that, right? It can be graded and created to whatever it is the park district and the residents would like to see. So I just really this was very helpful to me. And usually wetlands are a combination of all of these things. And so that's the kind of thing that we see at Middle Fork Savannah, and hopefully most people are familiar with Middle Fork Savannah. It is a nationally recognized savanna because of some of their virgin prairie that they have in there. So anyway, if you haven't been there, I hope you'll check it out. I also just wanted to show this. These are some native plants, and it just shows you how wetlands hold so much water and how important they are actually in any kind of stormwater and flooding areas that you might have, including in your own backyard. Some of these root systems go down 18 feet. And so they are holding a ton of water. And one of the things that Kurt had also talked about on the meeting on the 18th is that wetland plants like these are really great for breaking down the toxins that end up in stormwater. Right here, this is turf grass, right? If you can see that. So you can see the significant difference. And that's why it's why wetlands are really so important. So I just want to give you some examples of what that looks like around here. So this is Middle Fork Savannah. It's a mix of wetlands. It's a mix of, there's an oak savanna right in the distance. You've got some woodlands. You've got a wet prairie. So there's wet prairie in there. If you've walked, you've maybe seen that. There's a mesic prairie. So that means it's not wet all the time. It's just moist just during the growing season. And then there's sedge meadows and there's marshes. So that's the kind of thing when we're talking about wetlands in terms of this project. In speaking with the Lake County Forest Preserves, they said the best way to help people understand it is have people go out to Middle Fork Savannah and look at that. And that's what we'd be talking about. So there's that. Another thing to think about is these are the preserves at Highland Park. You might be familiar with the Highland Park Country Club. It was formerly a golf course. I think they're in year 2. They could be in year 3. They had closed their course. I think it got sold to the Park District, and the Park District has turned it into walking trails and active and passive recreation area. So just to help people understand, hey, what does a wet prairie look like? This is the wet, kind of wet prairie around here. It's often on the sides of ponds and things like that. And then obviously this is a marsh or open water. So again, this is in Highland Park. It's just off of, it just was there yesterday. It's just east of the Target where they have their fitness center, if anybody wanted to go down there and check that out. The next, here's another thing that they have. This is their forested wetland. So this is an example, again, where this was formerly a golf course. They've probably just used these cart paths, which is awesome. And then they've put all these wetlands here. So they've got about 50 acres of wetlands on this place, and now it's called the preserves. And here's another example of other wetlands. This is their marsh area in down there at the preserves in Highland Park. And I thought this was a great photo that they shared with me of some kids fishing. There's actually a guy, he's cut off in this picture, but there's somebody down in here. Not sure what he's doing, but anyway, it really, wetlands can be used for recreation, passive and active recreation. You can have walking and biking trails. You could have fishing, you could have bird watching, you could still have cross-country skiing. So there's really a lot that can be done with wetlands. And I just thought that was really important because, it's there's so many different names for wetlands. And I just thought it was important for people to understand that when we're using the term wetlands for this particular project, that's really what we're talking about. So if you've been on this call or maybe you, or excuse me, or heard about it around town, there's been a lot of conversation about a wetland mitigation bank. So a wetland, and this is also Middle Fork Savannah, as you can see, a wetland mitigation bank is used to ensure that we don't lose more wetlands. It is a federal law, and wetlands are so important really to for the biodiversity, but also just to protect property from flooding. So if there's a construction project that's going to negatively impact wetlands, they have to be mitigated. And if, as a friend of mine put it, it's almost like, oh, you know, I have this construction project and I, you know, had to take down these trees. You got to pay somebody to plant new trees. It's kind of like that, right? If you fill in these wetlands, then you got to pay for somebody, or you could do it yourself on site to establish new wetlands. So there's never a net loss of wetlands. That can be mitigated on site, so on the site of where the development is occurring. But what also happens is that people can purchase credits from something called a wetland mitigation bank. The entity that owns a wetland mitigation bank will always maintain ownership of their land. They are not selling their land, they're not giving their land away. They own the land and they make revenue off of that property. And what I think is important, at least for people in Lake Bluff, and this is just from what I had understood for years ago, I think many people have been very concerned about, hey, what happens if that's not a golf course? You know, they would not want it to see developed. I'm not saying everybody feels like that, but that's something that I've certainly heard. If there's a wetland mitigation bank on a property, that land is protected in perpetuity. So, you know, today if something happened, you know, depending upon who serves on what boards and the feel of the residents, maybe land could be sold. But if it's a wetland mitigation bank, it is protected forever. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means. So this wetland bank is a revenue source for the landowner. And I want to talk about this particular project. So for this particular project, we need somebody, right, to hold to store that water for us, right? And so whether that's a detention basin or wetlands, we'll pay for it because it's part of that regional project. So stormwater management is going to construct whatever the park district would want. If they want to partner with, we might suggest that wetlands would be a benefit. They could construct wetlands on the park district property. The park district could get permitted as a wetland bank by the Army Corps of Engineers. It takes about a year, and there are minimum acres that you need to be a wetland mitigation bank. So, and we can talk about that if anybody wants to put a question in the chat. We'll make sure to come back to that. And so down the road, so they get permitted as a wetland bank. Let's say there's a project that impacts an existing wetland, right? They're going to have to mitigate for that project off-site. So they're going to purchase a credit. They need to purchase a credit from a wetland bank, right? They got to mitigate for what they did. And maybe that would be the park district. So the entity will pay the park district for those wetland credits. One thing that I just want to bring up real quickly, because you know, we hear like, well, wait, there's got to be a catch, right? You know, it's free money. That doesn't happen. You know, the catch is that this is part of this regional flooding project, right? So stormwater management is going to construct those wetlands and do this because we've got to fix that project. So if we got to fix that project, we're going to make sure that we're putting in all the proper controls and improvements to make sure that we do that. So it's not, you know, free money or whatever. Whomever is helping us with this project, that's why we're going to construct it. So I just wanted to kind of come back to that, because once this project is done, you know, this is not going to be available in the future, right? And we're committed to making sure that people's homes aren't flooding anymore. So I hope that that's a pretty good example. And I do want to say, you know, if a number of people have reached out and said, well, wait, I really like having a golf course. You can have a golf course and wetlands. that is something that can be done. So impacted wetlands may require higher mitigation rates. So what that means is, let's say you have a developer and they're impacting a wetland. Maybe it has a bunch of, you see it's got buckthorn on it and cattails, and I don't entirely know what phragmites are, but I've heard of them. They have to, if they're doing it within the same watershed, and I'll show you what that looks like, for every acre that they damage or negatively impact, they need to buy 1.5 acres of wetland mitigation credits. So that way we never have that net loss, and it's greater than a 1-to-1. If there are no credits available in the watershed, and I apologize, I probably should have put the other one first, those credits, they have to be purchased on a 3-to-1 ratio. And it just changes depending upon the quality of the wetland that has been damaged, if you will, right? So a high quality forested wetland, right? In the same watershed, the project's in the same watershed as where that wetland bank is. If they damaged 1 acre, they'd have to essentially purchase 6 acres. You know, I did see Larry McCotter's hand go up, and if he can put something in the chat feature, and if he can't, that's fine, in case he's on his phone. Larry, I will remember to call on you when we're taking questions. So thank you for that. So this is, I hope you guys can see this. Obviously, this is all of Lake County. And these are Lake County wetland banks. The black ones are active credits, but most of them have really been sold. And what I want to be clear on, some of them will say, and this is already out of date. We created this presentation, I want to say July or August. It's already out of date. Credits have been selling just over the last few months. So in all of Lake County, there's only 3 credits left. I think they're all right here in Squaw Creek Mitigation Bank. So to give you an idea of sort of how it's sort of changed over time, in the last 11 years, 190 credits were sold. And of that 190, almost 60%, and I didn't even recalculate, it could be 60%, have been sold since 2018. So there's a lot happening right now, right? So 4.1 credits have been sold just in the last 3 months. You might say, well, wait a minute, Sandy, I see in some of these areas, there's some mitigation bank, like down here, hopefully you can see my cursor. It says Lake County DOT Buffalo Creek Mitigation Bank. Hey, there's a lot of credits down there. Lake County DOT obviously does road work. So they buy a bunch of land and they mitigate it themselves with their own mitigation bank. Nobody else can access those credits. Those are just for Lake County DOT. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm gonna try and talk as much as I can about wetland credits, but honestly, we would almost need an additional presentation to go over sort of the ins and outs of wetland credits, because there's just a lot of background and how Army Corps of Engineers goes through their permitting process and what are isolated wetlands, and it's just a lot. So we hire specialized wetland scientists to do this work. We contract a lot of that out. I do recall at a recent Park District meeting that they had contracted with a referendum consultant, and wisely, I would say, they said that the consultant would also be looking into other revenue sources aside from just going out for referendum. And so it is a lot of information to take in. It is complicated, and you know, potentially there's a way that maybe that consultant could even be helpful in delving into the details of these wetland credits for that task force that's being created. So I hope that helps, but what I really want to drive home is that there's only 3 credits left in all of Lake County. And we're seeing significant construction over time. So, oh, I didn't touch upon this. You can imagine that building a wetland is expensive. So let's take a farm field, for example. If somebody had a farm field and they wanted to turn it into a wetland, you know, you got to get a surveyor, you got to get an engineer, you got to get somebody who's going to be able to find all the drain tile and pull them out. You got to get all the excavation, all that stuff, right? So the government recognizes that that's expensive. And so they're like, hey, you know, once your wetland bank is approved, you can start selling 30% of your bank's credits pre-construction. Before you're touching a blade of grass, you can start selling those credits, right? So that you can earn the money that you need to do the work. We did a lot of, as much research as we could do since October 18th, talking about this additional 20%. The additional 20% may be sold, okay, upon demonstration of wetland hydrologic water supply, which is a total mouthful. What that means is for those wetlands that have already show that they get a lot of water. So maybe the wetland is along a river, maybe it's in a floodplain. The Army Corps of Engineers may allow that wetland mitigation bank to sell that additional 20% prior to doing anything. There could be some grading that could be necessary to get to all of the 20%, depending upon what the site looks like. But you can imagine you'd have to do a lot of, a little bit of surveying work and looking at topography to get the answer to that. So I hope that that is helpful. One of the things that I do want to mention in terms of Lake County, when I talk about how things are expensive, in this particular instance, it wouldn't cost the Park District anything, right? There's no cost to the Park District for the creation of whether it's a detention basin or wetlands, because it's going to help with that regional flooding project. So I just really want to make sure that I mention that. So here's an example of a project that's actually on 41. Excuse me. So this is Highway 41 here on the right side. Here's a building, and hopefully you can kind of see the outline. They want to move westward, right, into these wetlands here. So these are all wetlands. It's not part of the IDOT Wetland Mitigation Bank. These are all wetlands. And so the Army Corps or the permitting is going to say, hey, as a result of you doing this work, you're going to need to purchase X amount of wetland credits. They can't mitigate it on site, right? These are already wetlands. So they're going to have to purchase some wetland credits. This particular project just happens to be in the same watershed as the Lake Bluff Park District. And I want to go back here, and I apologize. These are all the different watersheds. I should have brought that up. I should have pointed that out. So I apologize that I didn't. This is called the North Branch Chicago River Watershed. There are no credits available in the North Branch Chicago River Watershed. So any projects that are being worked on, any development that they can't do on-site mitigation and they are negatively impacting wetlands, they're going to have to purchase credits outside of the watershed. So I just really want to be be clear on that. So this is one project that we learned about. They're going to need to mitigate. They can't mitigate within the watershed. There's also another project that's in process. I don't have the details, but it's also in the same watershed. And they are also negatively impacting wetlands. So I can tell you that on the local level, at our level, at the county, the state and the federal level, we are seeing infrastructure spending that we haven't seen in decades. Lake County is also seeing an increase in residential and commercial development. And that is likely, there's no promises, but it's likely that will be impacting any of those things. Any of that development is going to impact wetlands. And so we do think that there would be an increased demand. The prices for wetlands is really based on supply and demand. Right now, as I said, there's 3 wetland credits in all of Lake County. And we anticipate that there's going to be a high demand. And I do want to say, when I first moved to Lake County, I guess I just thought it was Lake County because of the lake, Lake Michigan, right? But it's not, it's Lake County because of all of the lakes, right? There's a lot of wetlands and lakes and ponds in Lake County. And so if there's going to be development, again, it's highly likely that it's that they're going to need to have some kind of wetland credit. The estimated value for a wetland credit in the North Branch Chicago River watershed, is about $150,000 a credit acre. I can get into where we came up with that number. I think I'm going to put it in the frequently asked questions because it takes me a little while to explain it, but in hopefully a pretty quick nutshell, a portion of a credit sold in the Fox River watershed for 0.21 credits sold in the Fox River watershed for $150,000. 0.21 sold for $31,500, which equates to $150,000 per acre. So why do we think that little thing out there in the Fox River watershed means that it's going to be worth that all the way over here? Well, the most valuable watershed credits are in the North Branch Chicago River watershed and some in the Des Plaines River watershed. But it's very difficult for us to get data on those prices. It's a what do I want to call it? Proprietary information, right? It's they own it, and so they don't have to tell us exactly how much. So sometimes when there are permits that go through, sometimes people attach the amount that they paid for that credit, and sometimes they don't. So we have an estimate of $150,000. Our wetland specialist thinks that's a very good price to use as a rule of thumb as to what a credit acre would be worth in the North Branch Chicago River watershed. So wetlands, like I was talking about, it's expensive to build a wetland. And it's expensive, you know, a wetland bank or just a wetland, right? So the construction estimate for a full site, let's say the Park District really wanted to do 40 acre feet on the Park District property, it's about $7 million. And that is all paid for by Stormwater Management. There's no cost to the Park District because remember, it's part of this regional flooding project. It will be paid for by Stormwater. That's the engineering, that's the excavation, that's the grading, and that grading could be however the Park District and the residents of Lake Bluff want it to look like. It's hauling off the material and disposing of it, taking the topsoil, removing it, and then replacing it, and then having erosion control planting. I also want to mention, and this question came up on the 18th, was, hey, I thought that they would be helping with the planting, stormwater management. And you're right. So I should have updated this. It's not just the erosion control planting like a cover crop. It's actually stormwater management will put in plugs where it's necessary, where there could be erosion, right? And they'll also do seeds across the entire space. And I also want to be clear that this money, this 7 million or whatever it turns out to be, is not capped. So it's not like if this project goes over budget or whatever, that we're going to come knocking on the door to the Park District and thereby the residents of Lake Bluff and say, hey, we want more money. No, there's no cost to the Park District. It's part of this regional flooding project. And so all of those construction costs are paid for by Stormwater. And that's through grants. And if somebody wants to know more about those grants, please put a question in your chat or in the chat, please. And we'll make sure to answer that. So short-term maintenance can be high. And I want to thank Vice President Beeler of the Park District. She asked some really good questions about the short-term maintenance. And so I did do more research. I think initially I had between $1,000 and $5,000 per acre. And now we see it's a little less than, it's actually what I'm finding is somewhere between 350 or less for the short-term maintenance, but I'm going to be conservative and say it's about $500 an acre. And that's again for erosion control, planting natives, and just making sure that you're not getting in any aggressive invasive species. There's also no cost to the park district here, not because Stormwater is paying for it, but a local anonymous donor has pledged $1 million to care for the plants. So for planting them and caring them for them, those short-term costs. I didn't put it in here. I apologize. I thought I had, it might be in my notes. Yes, and that is if there is no golf course. So that anonymous donor is willing to do it. They're okay if it's something, you know, a couple other things, and I'll show you guys what that looks like, but that's if there's no golf course. So in that scenario, there's no cost to the park district for that either. This would be the cost to the park district. It's the long-term costs. Again, we did more research on this. It's less than $200 an acre per year. Previously I had on there about $1,000 per acre per year. So it's what we're finding is it's about $25, sometimes $142. So, but conservatively speaking, less than $200 per acre per year. And that's if the entity is hiring a contractor to come on the site with all of their equipment and essentially doing it themselves. So, sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm speaking essentially, but if you have an agency that already has staff that maybe, you know, mows turf grass, that is planting plants, that's pruning trees, they're doing some exterior maintenance like the park district has, a lot of that could be absorbed. And I just want to say kudos to the Lake Bluff Open Lands, you know, through small donations by Lake Bluff residents. Lake Bluff Open Lands has been doing much of this for, you know, probably about $1 per acre for years. So the really spectacular native spaces that we have is really due to the awesome volunteer efforts of Lake Bluff Open Lands for the work that they do. So thank you very much. So anyway, so really clear, no cost here, no cost here, there's cost here, a little bit less than $200 per acre per year. And we know the park district has costs already, of course, as they're maintaining our awesome parks and the beach. I did want to add this in here again. So if options 1 or option 2 is selected, if you guys remember, right, those 2 options on the Navy base, this funding is not going to be available because the project will be complete, right? We will have already fixed the regional flooding issue and we will have moved on. So hopefully that's everything there. So really there's a considerable revenue opportunity for Lake Bluff. It's up to the park district, and I would say the residents of Lake Bluff of what they would like to see, if at all, right? You know, residents in the park district might say they don't want to partner. So there is a revenue opportunity for Lake Bluff. There's about 105 acres of suitable land that could generate, and I've put in here, we've done a little bit more research, about 77 wetland credits. The more research that we did was that you may or may not know that the park district property, the golf course property, is about 145 acres. So the stream that runs through the park district property, or excuse me, the golf course property, accounts for plus or minus about 10 acres. And that's our wetland specialist who gave us that number. So this is really a conservative number, this 77, because depending upon what could be done with the stream, you could get about 10 more acres out of that. And that's a more valuable acreage. So that would be more revenue, but we wanted to be conservative. And so on the high end, if all of the property were to maximize wetlands, it would be about $11.5 million. I want to be really clear that that doesn't mean that if the park district and the residents said, hey, you know what, we want to go down this path, we could really use that $11.5 million. That's not to say like, oh, great, yeah, you'll get it by 2025 or whatever. It's supply and demand, right? So who knows how long it'll take. I know Vice President Beeler had in her presentation that it's about 5 credits per year. I'm not certain where, you know, that number. We know in Lake County already 4 credits have sold just in the last few months already. So we don't know, right? We can't say it's going to be 5 credits a year or 15 credits a year or 1 credit a year. But if, you know, if the land is maximized for wetlands, for wetland banking, it'd be about 77 credits or more. Again, 30% of that could be sold in advance. So that would be about $3.45 million before anything is touched. And that can be sold up to 1 year prior to the project, you know, really getting in and excavating. And we talked a little bit about that additional 20% that could be sold essentially upon that, showing that that area gets wet already. So if there's a river on it or whatever, so that's a potential for another $2.3 million. And then after Army Corps comes out and takes a look and sees that the performance standards are being met, then they kind of release, it's called, they release the rest of the credits so they could be sold. I think what's really heartening is that those credits are very likely to be able to come through because of this very generous anonymous donor who's willing to pay for the maintenance, the short-term maintenance, to be sure that those wetlands and prairie areas are successful. Sorry. To give you an idea of about the size that we're talking about, Middle Fork Savannah is about 95 acres. Another thing for those of us in Lake Bluff, sort of all that open space at Artesian, right? The baseball fields and, you know, obviously the skating rink area, the playground area, the other baseball field, all the way up to almost the, you know, the fire department there. That's about the same size as what we're talking about. So hopefully that helps when you're thinking about the scale if you haven't been on the golf course. So I did want to share with you a few models that Sam Beckman, he's a resident of Lake Bluff. He owns a company called Emergency 9 Golf. He is a golf course designer. He offered up some plans pro bono to the Park District. I think he was contacted by the Park District in April to explore opportunities if wetlands were developed and if wetland credits were sold. I know Commissioner Weber had given a presentation on October 18th with some numbers, and he said himself, hey, these are back of the envelope, you know, back of the napkin numbers. And so I just wanted to continue to show these same plans that Sam had created to sort of say, hey, what could it be, right? If we, the Lake Bluff residents and the Park District wanted to take advantage potentially of these credits, what could it look like, right? So this is just something that Sam Beckman has designed. These are kind of wetland areas, and that would generate about 10 wetland credits in total, or about $1.5 million. And I do want to be clear that stormwater management would do all the grading for the places that are around where those wetlands would go, right? All of that grading, but stormwater management won't do sort of that final layer, if you will, right? The special grasses that have to, you know, be in there, and the sand traps and all of that kind of stuff. That would be outside of the scope of the project. And I also just want to state that the credit estimate was provided by Emergency 9 Golf, and Sam wanted me to point out that there could be, you know, a walking path around the perimeter of this, and maybe there could be some fishing or something in here. So you can have wetlands with a golf course. There's lots of golf course designs that include wetlands. So here's another one. This is called a 9-hole with a 6-hole course, and I have golfed. I'm not a golfer, but this is something that Sam has designed. And again, these are just general models. Who knows what, you know, if the Park District and the residents want to partner on this project, what the final thing could look like. But this would generate about 20 wetland credits. for about $3 million. And again, for this 9-hole and 6-hole experience with this driving range. And again, you can see that this area is kind of the wetlands. So you can have a golf course and wetlands at the same time. So the next one is, it's called an 18-hole experience on a 9-hole course. So essentially you would have, a hole where, in one of them, maybe this is a dog leg, I hope I'm using the correct term, sort of a dog leg here, and then a different one, it kind of goes over the wetlands here and ends up there. So you have an 18-hole experience on a 9-hole course. Sam wanted me to really mention that it differentiates the Lake Bluff Golf Course from local, regional, and national markets. You could have a 2.5-mile trail that goes around the outside. You could maybe have some fishing up here or something, maybe down here also, and all of this would be wetlands. So again, our wetland specialist didn't calculate this, but Sam did, and he suggested that would be about 37.75 acres. And for wetlands, and then there would be additional water storage at about 9 acres. So hopefully that's helpful. And then, what does it look like if the park district and the residents of Lake Bluff really wanted to maximize revenue and active and passive recreation space? Here's what it could look like if most of it was wetlands, right? So that would generate, per our wetland specialist, that's Hay and Associates, this would be about 64 wetland credits. And that's about $9.6 million. Again, it's not to say it's going to come in, right? It's a supply and demand market, but you could have some bridges, you could have some overlooks, you could have some of these boardwalks. You could also have sort of those fishing platforms that we saw that they're just doing down the road in Highland Park. One of the things that I recall when my kids were little and I was on the park district board at the same time, we don't have a soccer field here, right? We don't have a regulation play soccer field. There's so many kids who play AYSO soccer and other things. What would it look like if there was a soccer field here? You could maybe have a lighted field right there. Kids could play soccer locally. And then a dog park, right? We had some conversation about this on October 18th. The dog park is a significant revenue driver. We have 5 dog parks for the Lake County Forest Preserves District. It does bring in good revenue for us. This dog park is about 5.5 acres, and that's a potential revenue driver as well. And we're a dog community. I know when I go to the dog park in Lake Forest, I see I shouldn't say a lot, but I often see somebody from Lake Bluff there. So while I don't have the exact data on who wants a dog park or whatever, I do believe that if people are willing to drive, like myself, 15 minutes back, both ways into the south side of Lake Forest, I think I know I'd be willing to buy something to let my dogs play over here and hang out with my friends. So that's something that could be done there. It creates a yearly revenue opportunity, both of these. But what would it look like if it was all wetlands? These dotted lines, these are all trail systems, but again, they could look for whatever the residents in the park districts would like it to be. So this is just something that Hay and Associates had put together. Hay and Associates is a extremely reputable and well-known agency here in Lake County, and they do work all over the state of Illinois. So this just kind of gives you the breakdown of how you kind of get to those credits. So I know I've been talking for a long time. I'm going to try to speed up a little bit. So stormwater management can assist in setting up wetland banks, but I guess I just really want to make sure it's really up to the park district and the residents what they want that land to be, or what they want a stormwater retention to look like, or storage to look like. if they choose to help us with this regional project. In the end, we would pay for it, right? So stormwater management can assist, not going to do it, but they can assist in helping to set up wetland banks. So it's approximately a 1-year permitting process with the Army Corps of Engineers. And after it's approved, the owner or the contractor, right? Lots of agencies will contract with somebody. They would design and construct the site. And the reason why I have that line through that, that's already paid for, right? So stormwater management is doing all of that. They would negotiate the pricing and execute the purchase agreements. They update this regulatory agency. Yep, we're doing all the right things. We're clearing out our invasive species and all that kind of stuff. We're managing our permitting compliance. And then once all the credits are sold, right, they've always owned the property. The property owner needs to continue the maintenance. And I could say the maintenance in perpetuity, right? So it is important that it stays wetlands, just like we, I would assume any entity is going to manage things in perpetuity, whether it's your own yard and you're going to mow the lawn, or it's a park or the beach or whatever, right? It's going to be managed in perpetuity. And then if you're contracting out the service, that final revenue is obviously dependent upon the contract terms. Some people are like, hey, we just want to have a wetland banker, and they'll do it, and they'll take a cut, right? They'll take a cut of those earnings, but agencies often just do it themselves because the complicated part is here. This is the most complicated part, the designing and the constructing and getting it approved, right? That's the hardest part. After this, it's selling the credits and just making sure that the maintenance is occurring as it should. So hopefully that's helpful. So just to recap, right? The wetlands could be part of a variety of land uses, and that includes a golf course. The wetland construction, the wetland construction is covered by stormwater management. Hopefully I made that really clear. There's no cost to the park district. Short-term maintenance costs up to $1 million are covered if there's no golf course. The long-term costs are minimal. It's about less than $200 an acre, and that's if you contract it out. But again, the park district has staff that does that work, and so it would likely to be less. And then wetlands can be a source of revenue for landowners if if they chose to get a wetland bank. There have been some questions about there's other costs that could be incurred by the park district. There's these surety bonds and things like that. And I appreciate Vice President Beeler's good questions on that and the research that she did. And we can get into those details too. That's if you're sort of a private banker. When you're doing a program and you're a government entity, you just do an intergovernmental agreement. And so there's really, those costs would not be applicable. So we can get into the details. If anybody wants to talk more about that, we can go into the chat. So what are the options, right? What are the options for Lake Bluff? One option is to do nothing and to say, you know what, we're good. We're too busy. We're not interested. We're happy. So do nothing. The floodwater storage will be created on the Navy properties. The golf course will still flood. The reason why that golf course is still going to flood is because it's on a floodplain, right? So we're going, and when we're doing this regional project, we're going to make sure downstream flooding doesn't get any worse. So the golf course floods today. The golf course has been flooding for 40 years, for however long it's been there, and it's still going to flood. So that's if the floodwater storage is created on the Navy properties. Another option is to partner with Stormwater Management to create some wetlands or a detention basin, whatever they would like, but you could create wetlands, and that could have a potential for maybe a new golf course. Maybe it's even just some changes on a portion of the golf course. I'm not a golfer. That's way over my head. I don't know. It could also be passive and active recreation space for walking and biking and fishing and doing lots of things. So really whatever you could be doing at Middle Fork, Savannah, you could do on that space. And, if the park district was interested in perhaps additional revenue that they could have on a yearly basis, perhaps they would like stormwater management to grade the area and have it graded for a soccer field and a dog park. So, and then just as a reminder, those wetland mitigation sites are protected from development in perpetuity. So I often get asked, what's the next steps? I've added a little bubble in here, and thank you to the Lake Bluff Park District for establishing a task force or for talking about doing that. I would say we're here, right? So we're hoping that Lake Bluff Park District will re-engage with the partners on this project. And, you know, initially they've been talking, you know, since January. So I'd say we're about here. And then again, thank you to the Park District for establishing a task force to really tackle this and answer the many questions that exist. In the meantime, Stormwater Management is working on that project, right? We got to work on this regional flooding project. We have a lot of grant monies that have come in or that we're expecting and we already have in the bank. So we need to select that storage site by 2023. By the end of 2023, we need to have all of the contracts signed about what that project is going to look like, right? Everything is figured out by 2024, and by 2026, the project is complete, regardless of where that project is, right? Could be on the Navy base, could be on the Navy base and the Park District, you know, whatever that looks like. So that's kind of where we are today. And I think that is it. I am ready for questions. So I'm just going to go to this larger view. Let me see if I can open up here. I think I can go into the chat myself, Kurt. So I'm going to do that and see what questions there are here. Okay, I do have one message. It's what is the minimum acreage needed in order to be permitted as a wetland bank by the Army Corps of Engineers? Does the basic 40-acre storage site qualify? And I do know the person who has asked me this question. And so I'm going to go back to what I think she's referring to when she says the basic site. So let me just, excuse me, and I'll make sure I can go back to it. I think this person is talking about this site. And if I have that wrong, please correct me in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer that question too. So I think the question was, Kurt, and I think you talked about this on the 18th, but if you don't mind speaking to it again, please. Would this one qualify as an Army Corps of Engineers wetland bank?
Yeah, good evening. Kurt Wolford, Executive Director for SMC. The Army Corps of Engineer Wetland Mitigation Bank has a minimum acreage of 25 acres. So the total wetland size would need to be greater than 25 acres for the Army Corps banks.
Okay. And then, Kurt, I think you talked about before that there were other kinds of credits. So would it be like a different type of wetland credit?
Correct. So there's also, what we have locally as an option is an isolated wetland bank. And that is a smaller size that has to be at least 10 acres. So if you only have 10 acres, between 10 and 25 acres, it could be an isolated wetland mitigation bank. And the difference between an isolated bank and an Army Corps approved bank is how many customers you're going to have. The Army Corps bank can provide mitigation for any type of wetland mitigation, and an isolated mitigation bank can only sell credits for impacts to isolated wetlands, which are the smaller depressions and areas that are outside of the rivers. Those are not under the jurisdiction of the Army Corps. So there is a demand, but there's a greater demand for an Army Corps bank because you can sell for both types of credits.
Got it. Thank you. Let me just see if I answered. Okay, so essentially this basic, this site here it doesn't appear like that would qualify for those Army Corps of Engineering things. I want to say thank you to John Santel. He's the executive director of Lake Forest Open Lands. He's informed me that Middle Fork Savannah is over 600 acres, not including properties owned by Lake Forest Open Lands. So my apologies. I got that number off of the Lake County Forest Preserve's website. So I'll definitely double check that. So thank you, John, for correcting me on that one. We also have another one on the maximum option shown, developed by Hay and Associates, that anticipates 64 credits. How much of the physical design shown, boardwalks, trails, and bridges, riparian habitats, overlooks, soccer field, dog park, etc., get paid for by stormwater management? So why don't we go on to what that one looks like. Sorry. Technical difficulties. There. So, and I think she said aside from the grading. So on this, it would be all of the grading, right? So everything would be created, the grading, and then the soccer field, that would be paid for. So thank you for bringing this up. So like these trails, right? They could be wood chips, they could be gravel, or, you know, whatever the residents would like. So that would be added on for those trail systems. And then that soccer field, that would have to be paid for, right? It'd be graded and everything, but just that final layer would need to go on top of it. And the dog park, I can just tell you, when I go to the dog park, it's pretty much, you know, grass and some trees and whatnot. So, you know, I think that's just putting down some grass seed. So I hope that answers the question. Do you want to speak to any of that, Kurt?
Sure, I'll just add, for the project that we're working on, the flood storage and the grading and the stabilization of the ground, there's different methods for stabilizing the ground, and using wetlands and native vegetation. Those really are one of the best land use types. Sandy showed the one slide with the deep roots, and turf grass, those roots are so shallow that they do erode, and they do not hold the ground together. So the stabilization of the site, the wetland and native vegetation, that would be covered. But if there's other types of land uses, such as a soccer field or dog park or golf course, those are above and beyond what a stormwater and wetland facility would pay for.
Thank you. And importantly, that would include also fencing, right? So the dog park that I go to in Lake Forest has sort of split rail fence, and then it has other things so the dogs can't get underneath that. So that would also have to be paid for. Let me go back to the chat. And I guess even before I go back to the chat, is there something, Kurt, that you're like, oh, why didn't Sandy mention this? And I don't know if there is or not, but is there anything you wanted to add in?
No, I think you did a really good job, Sandy.
Oh, I wasn't fishing for compliments. I just, okay. Here's another question. It says, if the goal is to mitigate flooding in the 41 corridor, including the Strawberry condos to the west, why allow projects like the building project that's north of the sanctuary that I pointed out, shown in that presentation? Those are the types of projects that make the flooding in this area worse. Kurt?
So the SMC has a watershed development ordinance, and it's a development ordinance, and property owners have development rights. As a property owner, they have a right to develop, but they have to follow the rules and regulations. And mitigating wetlands, if they're going to be impacted, that's one requirement. Increasing floodwaters and drainage, that has to be mitigated as well. And that's why you see developments installing those detention ponds to hold the water so they're not releasing it much quicker. So there are regulations, but landowners do have rights to develop their property, and they have to be compliant with those regulations.
And thank you for bringing that up. You had talked about the detention basins. So they still have to keep the water on their property, right? So they need to keep the water on their property with that detention basin. And if they impact wetlands, they have to do those credits. So it's kind of twofold. But thank you for that question, because something related to that had come up before. So that's as much as I have in the chats. So I wanted to open up. I know there's a number of people that I recognize here. Just wanted to see if anybody had a comment they wanted to make, instead of putting something in the chat. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's one. Oh, sorry, Larry McCotter. Sorry, Larry. I said I would come back to you. Oh, you're muted. Go ahead. Oh, you need to, Kurt, you got to unmute him.
Okay, or Ashley, can you do that?
Hold on, we're almost there.
Yeah, I asked to unmute, so I think you should be able to.
Okay, so Larry, do you want to try to unmute? You're already unmuted? That's a problem. Okay. Ask to unmute, spotlight, rename. I'm going to let you play with that for a minute, Ashley. She's going to work on that, Larry, because I do want to hear from you, and thank you for your call. So it should be, Kurt, when you're letting participants in, you're managing participants, you can allow them to mute and unmute themselves. So we had a chat. If the village or the Lake Bluff Park District agreed to this, who would the initial credit revenue go to, and who would decide what that money would be used for? So actually, this is a park district decision. It's obviously it's a separate board, and so it would be the park district who would determine what that credit revenue would be used for. That would be their decision, and I'm certain you could. Sorry, I'm certain they would want some resident input. Larry, I wonder if you want to call me on my cell phone, and you want to do that? Okay, why don't you call me on your cell phone? And then I'll put you on speaker. Okay, well, Kurt's a civil engineer, not an IT guy. So you keep working on that, Kurt, if you don't mind. Okay, there was a follow-up question. They said, have they commented on this? The park district, not to my knowledge, has not commented on what they would do with the revenue. I think they're still in sort of the learning phase. Okay. All right, Larry, you're on speaker.
Okay. Oh. Sorry about the technological glitches here.
It's on us. No
but
worries.
There's been a lot of focus on the Middle Fork Savanna as an example of a wetland nearby. Unfortunately, many Lake Forest folks do not get out there, but I wanted to point out that far closer to home is an example, or multiple examples of functional wetlands, starting with the Skokie River Prairie Land and Water Reserve. It's called Land and Water Reserve because it was designated that way by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. And when the river floods, without doing anything, without any excavation, I estimate the Skokie Reserve retains probably 15 to 20 acre feet of water. And that is while the river is flooding, when you need that mitigation. And then as the river recedes, the prairie, the wet prairie, gives the water back at an appropriate level. I think this is part of our goal in terms of wetland mitigation. Now, I think what you're looking at for the Park District property would be a longer term mitigation. And that's good, but I just wanted to point out to people that not only is the Skokie Reserve right there for them to enjoy the beauty of with a parking lot on 176 just next to Mariani and the water plant, but south of that, you've got the Forest Preserve's Oriole Grove, which is 70 acres. that has only recently become owned exclusively by the Forest Preserve, and is in the process of, at some point, it's going to be a far more effective water retention facility. Then, if John Centel is with us, he could certainly address the benefits offered to the community by Lake Forest open lands properties further to the south. In terms of a wildlife corridor, we've talked for decades about the lands alongside the Skokie River, Highland Park to Unwensia to Lake Forest open lands, Lake Bluff open lands, and looking naturally at this Skokie River corridor going through the Park District and to the north. This is for wildlife as well, and that includes wetland and all the herbaceous plants and diversity that contains. I should say that prairies themselves are nature's best carbon sink, better than a forest, because they put all carbon retained underground and it stays there. That's a little bit off topic, but more prairie is better in the prairie state. And in terms of maintenance costs, I think you're right on in terms of seeing once a wetland is properly constructed, that maintenance costs are not terribly extensive if you have an area choked with cattails and phragmites. And hopefully for you, Sandy, you will continue not to know what phragmites is because it's terrible, but we don't want it. And that would certainly be part of ongoing maintenance. But if you start off with a clean slate, this will be a fairly straightforward thing and should not be considered a major ongoing cost. And I'm speaking as a member of the Lake Bluff Open Lands Board for a quarter century or so. And I have also run a natural areas restoration company just down the street for 16 years. And thank you for the opportunity to contribute.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Larry. And I'm so sorry, but I'm glad you knew my cell phone number so you could just call me. And I'm pretty sure everybody could hear. And you should be able to take your microphone. Everybody should be able to unmute themselves now. If you can't, please let us know. But thank you, Larry. Really appreciate that. And now I feel bad that I didn't bring up, of course, the Skokie Preserve where I walk, I don't know, 3 or 4 days a week. So.
Well, you left me the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Larry. I'm going to hang up with you because now you can unmute if you want. Okay, thanks. Okay. Anybody else? I don't have anything else in the chat. If anybody else had any other questions they wanted to ask, any thoughts, and if not, we're good. I'm going to send out a frequently asked question document to everybody. I think that's it, unless you guys are seeing anything else. Okay, I guess that's it. Well, sorry, I thought I had somebody's hand raised, but they don't. So thank you very much for your time. I really want to thank everybody for being here. We are videoing this, we have recorded it, and so it will be up. I do see somebody with their hand up. It is Sharon Dewart.
Hi, it's actually Mark, Sandy. How are you?
Oh, hey, Mark. How are you?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions just to make sure that I understand the alternatives here. First question is, the map that was provided way back at the very beginning terminated at Illinois 137. And it looked like, you can go back to that.
Yep.
Long way back.
This one?
Yeah, perhaps. Maybe it was even.
Well, I got another one,
Yeah.
So there's this one, and then there's this one.
There we go. So the roadway that's at the far north end is Buckley or 137. I'm trying to understand the watershed north of 137. Where is that? Is that on the golf course up there, the Naval Base golf course, or does does the watershed go over toward the west side of 41?
Sorry.
What actually happens up there?
I'm going to move over just to this one, if that's okay. I have sort of this Zoom stuff at the top of mine. And
Yeah, we can zoom around here with.
Are you talking about here, Mark?
Yeah, so the watershed that's at the northwest corner of 41 and 137, that's Abbott property, I think, right?
I think that's correct. Yep.
Does that represent an opportunity for development for this as well?
For a wetland bank?
Yeah, to collect, somewhere along the line, it would appear we've got to collect the water in order to mitigate downstream flooding. And I guess, that Abbott has owned that property for many, many years. And some of it is in agricultural use, and some of it is, I think, just fallow. So I guess I would ask the question whether that represents an opportunity as well. Again, I'm not trying to value one thing versus another, but just to ask the question for alternatives to address. Yeah. I mean, the name of the game is to try to mitigate this before it reaches any of the properties down here, whether it's people in Lake Bluff, it's golf course, it's Strawberry, or whoever it might be. So I guess I just asked that question. That's one of the questions that I had.
Okay. Well, why don't I have Kurt speak to that one? Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Kurt, would you mind speaking to that one, please?
Yeah, and I have been receiving direct messages, so I think that might be not coming through publicly. So I do have a list of questions.
Oh, good. Okay.
Here,
great.
And maybe we'll be able to get some more questions. So, do you want me to go through these first questions or answer?
Well, why don't you answer Mark's question? So Mark is kind of saying, hey, could some water be stored up here on this Abbott property? And, some of it is being stored, up there right now, but go ahead, either Ashley or Kurt, if you guys want to speak to that.
Sure.
Yeah, there's about 4 square miles up there.
Right. And so there was a question. Yeah, and I think this was your question. What is the origin of the watershed north of 137? The North Branch of the Chicago River, it's the only watershed that starts in Lake County, and it starts up near Grand Avenue. So Grand is kind of the headwaters, and it all drains south into the Chicago River. And if you walk downtown in the Riverwalk, that's all starting up near Grand Avenue. The other questions I saw was that this Chicago River watershed is very urbanized, and it is. It's the most urbanized watershed in Lake County. It's a lot of development, and that development occurred prior to a lot of the stormwater and floodplain regulations. And a lot of developments do flood because they were grandfathered in, built before there were regulations. So one of the goals for the Chicago River watershed is to find storage really wherever you can find it, up and along this narrow corridor. And this is one site, and we are working on another site up in Waukegan at Route 120. We completed another project north of Washington, and then we're working also downstream. So really the goal is wherever there is opportunity to put flood storage on the Skokie River, that's where you put it. It's so built out, and this location up here north of 137, that could be an ideal spot for additional storage as well. So one large reservoir would not solve the flooding for the North Branch. It's these decentralized nodes of storage up and along the watershed. That's how you address the flooding in the North Branch.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was coming from. If trying to sequence this, perhaps it's something of a cascade effect with a watershed there north of 137 could have potentially have an impact on reducing the size or the scope or what have you of other sequential watersheds along the way there, whether they be on naval base property or Park District property, or Larry was talking about the absorption that the Lake Bluff open land Skokie has as well. It kind of multiplies that and I would guess helps to reduce the impact for everyone in terms of moisture, water rise, moisture absorption, and those kinds of things.
Absolutely. And there was a study done probably in the early 2000s, and that was the conclusion: is all these areas along the Skokie River, wherever you can find storage, try to put in storage. This is the most active subwatershed. So the Skokie River watershed is the eastern fork of the Chicago River system in Lake County, and the middle fork and the west fork. But the Skokie River, that is where we've invested a lot of time and money and coordination to address the flooding. And we're not done. We're going to be working throughout this watershed for a long time. But that is the way to address flooding, is to find projects up and along, starting all the way at Grand Avenue and all the way down to Lake Cook Road.
There you go. Sandy, I have one other question, then I'll
Sure.
let Kurt cover the other things. Putting on my Lake Bluff hat for a second, it would be helpful for me to see, you addressed option 1's acreage credit. It would be helpful to have a table of the different alternatives and the credits available for each. I think as people, and option 1, description and available credits, financial impact, and that kind of thing, that would be a real help, I think, for me anyway, to understand among the local impacts in Lake Bluff, so that it might be easier for folks to kind of get a grasp of this is what's available for this, and this one is what's available for that one. And Kurt, thanks for explaining local options versus Corps of Engineers. And I'm off of here. Thank you very much for chatting.
All right,
And
thank you. And you know what, Mark?
You can
I'll
mute
put,
me now.
Mark, I'll put a table together like that, and I'll probably do a little asterisk to show, like, look, the options are endless. Really, we kind of showed some extremes, right? Like, hey, here's an 18-hole golf course with some wetlands, to the other extreme, whereas nothing but wetlands. The Highland Park Country Club, what they did was they did 50 acres of wetlands, and I thought she said like 50 acres of turf, and they have playgrounds and all sorts of other things, and then some open water and things like that. So truly the options are endless. So I will, but I'll put that together, and I'll just make sure that I asterisk that. Kurt, you said you had some other questions that came to you directly.
Yep, I'll just start at the top. Kate Amaral asks, what's the difference between detention and retention? It's a great question, and a lot of people, you can probably just think of them as the same thing, but technically the difference between detention basins and retention basins is detention basins detain the water and slowly release them into a river system or a storm sewer. It's detaining it and slowly releasing it. And a retention basin, it's retaining it, it's holding on to it. And the only way the water is evaporated into the sky, or it's infiltrated into the ground. And Lake County, we have all these lakes everywhere because the subsurface of most of Lake County is really thick, hard packed clay that doesn't drain well. And that's why we have our flooding problems, because water doesn't like to drain into the ground. The native vegetation on that slide that Sandy showed, those root systems do drill themselves into the ground up to 18 feet. So that actually aids in infiltration. So native plants, what you see on the surface, it looks nice, but in the civil engineering world and in the native plant world, what you don't see is underground. And you can see on this slide, these roots really help to break up that hard clay and help infiltrate water into the ground. So you won't see many retention basins in Lake County. They're mostly detention basins, which are draining out into other waterways. Next question, Janice and all. We so wish we had 40 acres for you to use. We are trying to enhance our wetland areas. Let's talk. Like we just said, we need to identify areas to mitigate all along the watersheds. So feel free to follow up with us, and we'll see what kind of opportunity we can work together with your site. The other one, John Matthews, is this wetland bank approach being used in the work being performed at the Lake Forest Golf Course along Deer Path Road? That, I don't have the full details, but maybe that's the IDOT project that they're excavating large detention basins for some IDOT work. So those, I don't believe.
I think that's like right at 41 and yeah, and Deer Path, right? And I think they've done some huge like ponds or whatever on their golf course property, right? And I think there's a pumping station there too, I think. So John, if that's not, if we're not answering the right area, let us know. But no, I don't think, yeah, it's not related because that's outside of, this is like kind of the 137 to 176 area. And that's actually another, like Kurt was saying, there's flooding all around. That's just another area that they're having to fix the flooding.
All right, Pam Russell, the question or the comment, if the goal is to mitigate flooding in the Route 41 corridor, including the Strawberry condos.
I think I answered that one already.
Okay, I'm just going down the line.
Okay.
Bill Herman, I'm in favor of alternatives to the golf course, but we shouldn't be developing in wetlands, full stop. No matter whether someone wants to make a buck on some cheap wetlands he found, that's the overall problem. That condo development is below grade. The county originally let that happen. The county, and particularly this watershed, is overbuilt with railroads, roads, power lines that follow the east branch of the Skokie. Trading the golf course for unsustainable further wetlands development is not a benefit to the community. And yeah, the Skokie River is the most urbanized watershed, and lots of that was built prior to the regulations, including the condos. If those condos were built today, and even if the Skokie Highway was built today, it would not flood because it would be elevated. But these were all developed prior to the regulations. They're grandfathered in. We have more flood problems in existing developments that predate our ordinance. Most developments since 1992, when our ordinance became effective, they have to adhere to those floodplain and drainage standards. Not many developments after 92 have flood problems. It's a lot of the earlier developments.
Right. Hey, Kurt, can you speak? And I think this is a question that kind of came up at our meeting on the 18th. And obviously Bill is bringing up a good point. Like, hey, people shouldn't be building in these wetlands, right? I mean, these wetlands are really valuable. They've been there for, who knows, centuries, right? So can you brought up a little bit earlier, like private landowners are allowed to do certain things. And I think this is a federal law, right? So can you just speak to that, please?
Sure, and that's right. The regulatory agencies are not taking your land, they're not taking properties, but they are requiring mitigation. And sometimes that mitigation ratio that Sandy showed is very high. Impacting a high quality forested wetland is going to require 6-to-1 mitigation, but a low
Let's see if I
quality,
can find it.
a low quality degraded wetland is 1.5-to-1. So these mitigation ratios are higher than the impacts. That does deter, or it requires a site planner or a designer to kind of think about it and also the developer, what's the trade-off? If it's going to cost them a large of money to impact a wetland versus maybe thinking about the design a little differently to not impact the wetlands, that would not require such a large mitigation cost. That's kind of the background on why these ratios are higher too. It does disincentivize all the wetlands to be filled in, but property owners do have rights for development, but they have to follow the rules.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for being on here, Bill. Appreciate it. Did you have any other ones, Kurt?
This was regarding the Deer Path site. We talked about that. Mary Scanlon Hogan, thanks so much for your work on this. If the golf course were to go away, have you thought of what might happen to the current clubhouse and the adjacent concrete footpad, maybe a small community event center? So SMC, just so everybody on this meeting understands, SMC is not a land use authority. We regulate the watersheds for stormwater, wetlands, and those type of uses. If there's wetlands, if there's a golf course, a club, a soccer field, that's not in our purview of authority. We're really trying to just fix the drainage problem, ensure flooding doesn't increase. And Sandy mentioned it earlier, we are experiencing increased rainfall in our region. And unfortunately, that trend is projected to get worse over time. So that's another reason why we need to have these types of projects. But yeah, if there's other land uses that the community or the park district would like, that's a local decision. And we're flexible on where the storage is, what the land use is. So we're very grateful to be at this point where the community can think about and decide what they would want. So that's not something that we would mandate or decide what the community would like.
Right. Thank you. And thank you for bringing that up, because I think some of the communications back in January, it was like, hey, this is volunteer. This is just a volunteer thing. We need this, this minimum acre feet to store water. And so there's no like taking of property. There's none of that. It's a partnership of the entities working together, to alleviate this flooding, right? And so it just so happens for Lake Bluff, because of that parcel, it's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity for Lake Bluff, and it's up to the residents of Lake Bluff and the Park District about what they, I guess I would say if they want to consider that to be an opportunity. But I think it's just so important that we have the, that we have the conversation. So I had a question that was sent to me. It was, can you talk about the educational opportunities for the children of Lake Bluff if this was all wetlands? I am not an educator. My kids did go to the Park District preschool, and the teachers there were awesome. They spent a lot of time outdoors. Certainly they couldn't go out of the golf course, right? But I would guess that if there were the wetlands there, I would guess that would probably be well utilized. I suppose by the camps and the preschool program, maybe even the fitness center could do some things out there, depending upon whatever the Park District wanted. I suppose you could have some outdoor fitness areas, or could do outdoor yoga or whatever. And then I know that the elementary school, has done some walks into the Belforet wetlands that Lake Bluff Open Lands takes care of for the Park District. I think that one's for the Park District. So, they do have some outings from the East School for the kids that go over there. So I would say there's definitely some, pretty awesome educational opportunities for our kids, depending upon what this is, right? As well as recreational opportunities too. So, but that's not my, that's outside of my knowledge base. I had another one. It said, what is that little circle that you referred to by Route 41? Let me go back to that little circle. And Kurt and I were talking about that earlier today. This little circle down here. So that is right at the railroad tracks, right? So there's 41, and you kind of go underneath the railroad tracks there, and then you continue down to get to 176, right? So there's some flooding that occurs under there. So IDOT, I think it's IDOT, yeah. IDOT is working on a pumping station there. Right now that water pumps out and goes into the Skokie. So I think, are they getting maybe a bigger pump? Do you know, Kurt?
That's right.
So that'll be a bigger pump to move that water out more quickly and into the Skokie. I'm going to say, stormwater management has a charter or a policy, like we're not going to increase flooding. So do we know about IDOT? If they're going to have a bigger pump, it's going to pump out more water there. Is that going to, well, you're not involved in that project.
Yeah.
So I don't want to make you speak to something you're not involved in.
Our regulations are county jurisdiction and municipal private. We don't have any authority to regulate state agencies or federal. So IDOT is going to be upsizing their pump, and I'm sure folks have seen that underpass flooded. It does pump down eventually, but to keep the road open, they're putting in a bigger pump that'll pump out the water quicker, kind of like what we're proposing to do with the railroad culvert to get the water to drain off Route 41 in that larger circled area. The bottleneck is really that star, which is the culvert from the railroad. Before this watershed was developed, the railroads were here first before anybody else. Well, actually the wetlands were here first. And then the railroads, when they were laying their track, they put in a culvert for what was needed when the entire area was rural. But a lot of these railroad culverts have not been upsized, and now there's a very large amount of urbanized area, lots of impervious surface, the higher rainfall. That culvert is restricting flow, and to open that up will drain out Route 41 quicker. The IDOT project is very similar for that little circle, although the drainage area there is pretty small. It is the underpass. It holds water that, I've seen cars underwater and people have to leave their vehicles because their cars are completely flooded. So that pump station will just drain out that underpass quicker. So they're similar projects. One's being pumped and one's being a larger pipe. So that's what that little circle is down there.
Okay, thank you. That was a new addition to the that, because somebody had asked about it, I think a couple weeks ago. I don't have anything else. And if anybody has questions, do they have the access to the raise hand feature, Ashley?
I still have some direct messages.
Oh, good. I'm sorry. Pardon me, Kurt. Go ahead.
I'll go in the rest of the order here. Todd Porter asks, I'm curious how much the golf course option would cost. If bluffers agree to some credits, is there a way to simultaneously commit the board to rebuild a golf course? If so, how long would we go without one? I'm worried the talk of the possible golf course is a red herring. So that's a great question. And that's where our project would not pay for a new golf course, but our project could do all the grading, which is a big cost. But then that final layer of a golf course, that's above and beyond typical native vegetation. Golf course treatments are very expensive. I am not an expert in that, but that would somehow need to be paid from not through our project.
Right. And if I may, I do think Commissioner Weber had spoken to some of those costs. And again, he said, hey, these are kind of back of napkin costs. I thought that Sam Beckman had some costs of what it would be to finish that off, but that's, yeah, as Kurt said, that's sort of outside of our knowledge area or whatever, but I knew that Sam had created these plans, and so I wanted to include them in this, but I would guess that's probably a question for the Parks District. So, okay, sorry, go ahead, Kurt.
Sure. And Bill Herman, a follow-up question. Trading storage for development is a net zero proposition. Storage for storage alone is good. Trading it for development doesn't move the needle. And Sandy mentioned this earlier, that we've lost a lot of wetlands. And I'm not a wetland specialist, but what I've heard, Illinois overall, the entire state of Illinois, in the early days when people were settling into this area and farms and agriculture, they drained a lot of wetlands. Drain tiles are prevalent throughout the county. They're over 100 years old. They're failing. Those are old farm tiles. The farmers wanted to maximize their crop yield, so they drained all the wetlands, or drained as many as they can before there were regulations. And I've heard figures of 60, Ashley, maybe you know how many wetlands were potentially lost in the state, but it's a very high number. And in
I think it's almost all in the state. There's hardly any wetlands left in the.
I've heard 90%. Yeah.
I've heard not higher than 9. I thought it was like 99% or something. There's really very few wetlands left. Yeah, in the state of Illinois. I think somebody was saying calling it a prairie state is, they should change the name because there's no prairies left, no wetlands left.
Right. So we've lost a lot of wetlands over the last couple of centuries, and where we're at today, we want to preserve and hold on to what we do have as a no net loss policy, and that is a policy of the county, that we want to keep the amount of wetlands that we have, but they can be mitigated, and we'd like to achieve a net gain, and that net gain is achieved by these mitigation ratios. So as these wetlands do get impacted, you can see 3-to-1, 6-to-1, there are higher amounts required. So we are slowly building back our wetland reserves. So it's not necessarily a net zero proposition for wetlands. For storage, though, it is. Compensatory storage for mitigating flood damage. Areas are going to flood. The Skokie River is a floodplain. It will always flood. The flooding will likely get worse as the increased rainfalls continue to increase for our region. So the storage component is critical. And what we need is 40 acre feet for our project, a minimum. And that's just to kind of hold the line, not make the flooding worse, but not really improve the situation either. If more than 40 acre feet is provided, that does have a net positive. That is not a net zero. That is a benefit for the region, for the golf course, for Route 41, and for the entire watershed. That's that question. And I think, okay, Ashley, you put in the chat to everyone. So yeah, 90% wetland loss. Only 2.5% of the state remains wetlands. So that's all the questions that I see in the chat.
Okay.
I don't know if we should. I don't know if we should end on that note that there's only.
Right. I know that was kind of depressing. Is there anybody else who wants to say anything, or oh, I have a couple chats. Oh, but it was from Ashley. Okay. I think that was it. Was there another question maybe from Todd Porter in your thing, Kurt? I don't have it here, but it might be, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm misreading this. And no worries. So I guess, what I hear the most of after I make one of these presentations is like, hey, what can I do as a resident? I'm interested in this one way or the other. I want to make sure that we keep a golf course there, or, hey, I want the whole thing to be wetlands, or I'm interested in learning more about whatever. you know, I know the park district is really trying to figure out like, hey, how can we do a task force that's going to be fair and unbiased, and you know, what are those answers that we really need as we move forward on this project. So I know they've got a lot to unpack over there. We're going to try to do our part in doing that frequently asked questions. So if you do have more questions, please do send them along. I'm trying to categorize them, right? Some of the questions that we won't be able to answer. For example, you know, I've gotten a question that says, hey, you know, the golf course makes a lot of money. What are you know, are you sure that we can sell these wetland credits, you know, to offset the revenue that we're earning from the golf course? I can't answer that question. It's been a long time since I've served on the Park District Board. You know, part of that question will need to be answered by the Park District, right? How much money have they been making over the years? You know, what are their other costs? And then compare that, right, to, you know, hey, if we do a wetland bank, how much could the credits be, right? I had somebody say, well, I think the credits would be worth 135,000. That could be, you know, we think it's 150, somebody else might think it's 135. You know, there's just a lot, you know, a lot that's got to get figured out. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for being on here. If you're interested in this, send me your questions. I'll try to get them answered. For those things, you know, some of them might be answered at Lake Bluff. I don't know what Lake Bluff Park District's timeline is for creating that task force. So I don't know, but I can just tell you, we need to really select a site by 2023. Or is it the end of 2023, Kurt? I guess that's a question for you that I would have. I've always thought it was the end of 2023, but I could be wrong.
We need to be fully contracted by the end of 2024.
Right.
So the process to get the wetland bank approved, there's a prospectus, there's a charter, there's working with federal agencies, and your estimate of a year is probably a good one. So working backwards from that, knowing near the end of 2023 what that path is going to look like, that would be the good time to know in 2023 what our plan is.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And you had brought up prospectus and some other things, and there was again a presentation that was made after the one that we made on the 18th, and some of those questions came up, like, well, you know, there's going to be, you know, really big questions about, or excuse me, really big costs about the prospectus and things like that. I think a lot of the work that Stormwater Management is going to be doing would pay for that. I don't want to speak out of turn, but am I correct on that?
Absolutely. Yep. We have two of the best wetland specialists in Lake County that work for us, and they know the federal programs, they know the local programs. We want to achieve a multi-objective project. So mitigate the flooding, improve our wetland resources. Wetlands are a very good land use for water quality as well. They filter out the pollutants. They hold on to the water. Those deep roots help the infiltration, and the plants themselves take up water through evapotranspiration. So wetlands are a wonderful land use, and I look forward to bringing up those numbers to achieve more wetlands in Lake County. And I think I could add another good end note is that the funding sources are all around us right now. The type of funding that's available for flood mitigation, stormwater projects, and water quality at the state level, at the federal level, there are a lot of grants available for these types of projects. So there's at least 3 multi-million-dollar grants available for a project like this. And we want to just really acknowledge the work of our state, federal, and local elected officials for prioritizing flood mitigation and using these types of nature-based solutions to fix our problems.
Yeah. Now that's a good note to add on, I'm just going to say. So, all right, well, thank you very much. And thank you to Kurt and Ashley for staying late today, and really for all of your support with helping me put together this presentation. I really appreciate it. I know the residents of Lake Bluff really appreciate the extra time that you've given to help us all understand more about this project. So thank you very much. And anybody has any questions, please reach out to me. You can send me an email at smhart@lakecountyil.gov, or you can just stop me when you see me walking the dogs. Okay, thank you very much. Take care. All right, bye.
Bye, everyone.